Hello, class. I wanted to start before I get into this and let you know that this is going to be a little bit longer um, lecture than usual. So if you need to break it up and watch it over a couple days, that's fine. But it should help you both analyze the stakeholder text that you're asked to look at for the for the rhetorical analysis paper, and will also help you put together that paper. So it'll help you look at the text and tear it apart and put together your own argument about that text. So I'm trying to do a couple of things here. So it's going to take me a little bit longer, and I apologize up front for it taking so long. So if you watch this in parts, then you're more than welcome to. All right. So today we're talking about building an analytical argument. Okay, I'm going to focus on building an argument in general more than looking specifically at analytical stuff. If you have questions about what kind of evidence is needed for analytical argument and what kind of support can be found, we'll talk about that a little bit later, but you can also just send me a question. I'm more than happy to answer those. And then, of course, you can visit me during office hours. So just a real quick, I know we've seen this slide a lot, but you have your rhetorical analysis essay is what you're working on with your team. You're going to look at different stakeholders as part of the larger debate. And the goal of this assignment is for you to understand where that stakeholder is coming from. And in order to do that, you need to look at what they're saying. So we're going to ask you to take a close look at stakeholder texts. And that's why if you look at the other part of the prompt, I say you need at least one primary text, meaning it's from your stakeholder. Nowhere else, not someone talking about your stakeholder, not someone responding to your stakeholder, but from your stakeholder, their voice. And that's what the focus is of this essay. Okay? So if you do not have that, find it. And if you need help finding a stakeholder text, please come talk to me during office hours or send me an email. I'll be happy to help out. But the goal here is that you want to understand how your stakeholder talks about the controversy by looking at their text, right? Looking at what they have to say. All right. So we're going to go into this a little bit in detail, but the goal here is to kind of to understand what is going on with how your stakeholder approaches the topic and what their perspective is on the topic, and analyzing that so you really understand where they're coming from. Okay. So we'll start with stasis because that's the starting point for any rhetorical argument. And if you're going to put together an essay, then you need to start with stasis as well. Where is it that, what exactly are you talking about, and what is your stakeholder talking about? All right. So this stasis is just a fancy way to say what the argument is about. Okay, or what the debate is about, not, the big, huge topics. You want to look at the specifically, what is it about? What are they talking about? All right, and so for instance, your book mentions that global warming is a big problem when it comes to stasis because you have some people arguing about whether or not it exists, and then other people moving right on, and scientists, a lot of them, moving right past whether or not global warming is real and talking about how to fix it. Those are two different arguments, and that's why whenever we talk about global warming, it's hard to actually get anything done because nobody can agree on what we're talking about. All right? And this has to do, a lot of definitional arguments come down to this. So a lot of the big debates that you hear about have to do with this sort of problem. Okay, so for instance, abortion debates. Some people want to talk about what the argument is about the rights of the mother. Okay, so that would be the pro-choice side, and the other side wants to talk about the rights of the fetus, and that'd be not all the time, but a lot of times the pro-life side. Okay, so those are two different arguments. You're arguing about two different things, and unless you can meet somewhere and talk about something in specific, then you're just going to be talking at the other side. There's nothing's going to happen. So the goal of stasis is to kind of find when we're doing rhetorical analysis is to find where that argument is. What is this argument about? And if your stakeholder is talking about something different from what the other stakeholders are talking about, that's something that you want to know. So if you think that this debate is about this, you know, drinking under the age of 21 or the health value of vaccines, whatever your debate is, if you think that's what they're all arguing about, if you find out that your stakeholder is really concerned about something different, that's something that you want to bring up, because that's a good point to look at and a good starting point for your rhetorical analysis. What exactly what is their concern? What are they talking about? All right. So, and again, I'll just say now, I say it all the time, but when I use the term argue and talking about writing and rhetoric, argue is just a way to state your position, not to like get in a heated debate or anything like that. This is just a way to state your position, because if you're arguing, you have an opinion, you want other people to know it. That's all that arguing is in a rhetorical way. That's not the back and forth, you know, fighting that you might see. You might call argument outside of this classroom. So another way to think about stasis is that it's sometimes referred to as the quote-unquote issue, all right, the issue at hand and that sort of stuff. So you might debate about a big topic, but what's the issue that you're talking about? And I just want to turn us back to these stasis questions. And if you need to refer back to the first chapter in your book to see this, these are the different kind of stasis heuristics is what I called them before, but ways to understand what is the argument about. So you want to start with whether or not it's a question of fact. Is it real? Does it exist? Did it happen? Okay. So for instance, if you're talking about police discrimination, some people might be arguing about that it doesn't exist. Okay, I don't know who is going to argue that it doesn't exist at all, but some stakeholders might argue that there is no discrimination, that they're just being treated this way because of whatever reasons. That's a problematic argument, but that's an argument that people make. So when you're looking at your stakeholder, then you want to look at that specific stasis point. Is discrimination a real thing in police departments? Okay. Does vaccination actually harm people? Okay. So this is a question of fact. Is it a fact or is it not a fact? Or is it a question of definition? Okay. What is it composed of? All right. So what exactly is the purpose of a textbook in a classroom, for instance? Are we talking about what does a textbook need? And do e-texts do that better than print texts? Okay. So that's a question of definition. Okay. So these are things that people will argue if they're a stakeholder in a debate. You have questions of quality, which is what we talked about with the evaluative argument. And then you have cause and effect and proposal. So do not get worried about what's going on with the different rhetorical parts of your paper until you know what they're actually talking about. What's the stakeholder talking about? The best way to do that is to ask these questions, okay? Is this a question of fact? Is this a question of definition? Is this an argument about quality, about the quality of life, or about the quality of healthcare, or about the quality of a community engagement, or whatever, okay? I'm happy to help you guys out if you have questions about this, as with all these things, but this is a good place to start. So let me turn to what I talked about in the last lecture, which was this group, the Sphinx Theatre Company in London, which is a big group in terms of the Bechdel test and it's not gender equality, but like good representation of women in media. And they are big proponents of this, especially in England. So if I look at this this headline, okay, this is an article written about one of the things that Sphinx Theatre did. So this is not a primary text, okay, because Lynn Gardner is not part of that group, okay, but this is still useful to understand stasis. So what exactly does the Sphinx Theatre Company argue about the depiction of women in media. Well, this can give me a sense. Theaters must act now about gender inequality. Now, if I look at this, okay, then is that a question of fact? Not really, because there's no real the stakeholder is not concerned about whether or not inequality is a fact. They think that it's a fact. So it's not really a question of fact. It's not really a question of definition. They're not trying to understand what inequality is. Okay, so it's not that. Is it a question of quality? Maybe. I mean, I have to look deeper into the article. I can't just go off the headline on this. Is it a question of cause and effect? Maybe. I doubt it, okay, based off the headline. But again, I need to look deeper, and that's what part of this is. Analysis is to dig deep into, not to just make instant judgments. Analysis means to examine, to investigate, to go deeper. All right. So what I think it is a question of proposal. All right. Why? Because we use the term act. Theaters must act now. And I've read this article. It is a question. The argument is about proposal. So what do people need to do? Okay. And if we look back at this, what is proposal? What should we do? Is this? And so this is a stasis. The stasis, or the issue, is about what to do about inequality. Okay. Now this one is different, but this is from the Sphinx Theater Company. It's their Twitter feed. So this, and I'll get into this a little bit more as we go along. But this is more of a question not of proposal or what needs to be done, but more of a question of quality. Okay, is it important? Is it important that men get involved? And a question of cause and effect. What happens when men get involved, or how can we get men involved? Okay. So one way to look at stasis, and we're going to look at this, if you remember, is the rhetorical situation. I took out the context part, but this is a way to look at the rhetorical situation, which if we're doing a rhetorical analysis, then we're basically trying to understand why someone said something and what they said. And today I'm going to focus on why they said it, and when we talk about, and a little bit about what they said, but you know, the argument itself comes later. First, you need to understand the situation. So this is the rhetorical situation, okay, in which any sort of argument can come up. You have your audience, you have your rhetor, you have your topic, you have your exigence, which is the reason that there's talking in the first place, or purpose behind it. You have the context around which an argument is taking place, okay? Now, stasis is a way to understand the relationship between the rhetor and the subject. Okay, why? Because it's what the topic is. Why is this it's what the topic is about. So it's, you know, why the rhetor cares, or why the speaker or writer cares. Okay, it's what they care about. Okay, it's not just why, but what they care about, and what they care about in this larger argument is, or what they care about in the topic. That's a way to understand that, is to think about it in terms of stasis. But it's not just that, because in order for rhetoric to be worthwhile and to work, you also need to understand where the stasis is between the rhetor and the audience, and between the audience and the topic. Because let's say we go back to global warming. I'm a scientist, and I think global warming exists, and I want to start talking about what to do next. How do we reverse the trend? How do we prepare for what's coming, or whatever? Okay. If I'm talking to an audience of people that do not think global warming is real, and I start talking about what we need to do to prepare for global warming, then there's no connect. Nothing's going to happen. Why? Because the relationship between the rhetor and the audience is going to be lost, even if there is no animosity or, you know, pushback. Then we're talking about two different things. So there's no connection. Okay, and rhetoric, as your book points out, needs that connection. You start with an agreement, and that's the stasis. You start with the agreement, and then you move on from there. Well, there's no agreement there, so there's no relationship here. There's no agreement here, because if I'm talking about what we can do to solve global warming, and they don't think global warming is real, then this relationship is cut off too. All right. Now, if we look at something that works, as far as a stasis, where someone agrees, let's say you are ordering pizza. Okay, I go to this example quite a bit, but if I'm ordering pizza and I'm trying to convince my friend that we need to order pizza because, whatever, then what I might start with is make sure that we're on the same page. Stasis claims. Okay, so I will start with, it's 7 o'clock and we're both hungry. We should get pizza. Okay, that's an agreement. We both agree that we're hungry. Okay, I might need to make more of an argument about why we should get pizza and not hamburgers, or why we should get pizza instead of making food or whatever. But that's an agreement. We both agree we're hungry. We need to get some food. Right? So why not pizza? And there's the next step. That's where the argument comes in. But you need that stasis point where what the argument is about. Well, the argument's about getting food so that we're not hungry anymore. Okay, I hope that makes sense. If not, let me know. But here, if I look at that, then the red or in the topic, that's an idea of hunger. So we're dealing with an idea of stasis of definition. What does it mean to be hungry? Or a proposal. Okay, we're hungry. We need to do something. So what should we do? All right. So the audience also agrees with this. We have this agreement. Okay, and the audience, I'm assuming, wants to do something about being hungry. Okay. Now, if the audience doesn't want to do anything about it, then that's a whole other issue. But you assume that they want to do something about being hungry and, whatever. Okay. So the hungry would be the exigence. The stasis would be, we're hungry. We need to do something about it. What should we do? Okay. And there's the stasis, a question of proposal. Okay. I hope this makes sense. Once you have your stasis and you understand the issue that's being argued, then you move on to this idea of claims, okay? Because you can't really have an argumentation without having a sense of what you're arguing about, okay? And then once you have that, then you want to start making claims, all right? And a claim is just what you put forward, and this is from your book, what you put forward in order to persuade an audience to believe or do something. All right. So I'm claiming this so that you do something, or I'm claiming this so that you believe me. Okay. A way to look at this is that a claim is something that is not controversial, but it is something that not everybody's going to agree with. So the stasis everybody agrees with because that's why we're talking. All right. The claim is a proposal that you want people to agree with, but they don't necessarily already agree with it. All right. So, and that's where we get into problems with, to go back to global warming, scientists struggle with this because they think that the idea that global warming exists is a given that everybody agrees with. But without that stasis, there's nowhere to go with the claim because you're skipping past something that people agree with in order to make an argument about something else. So you want to make sure that you have the stasis, and then you can start talking about how to, resolve that issue that the stasis is about, or the issue at hand. Okay. So when we're looking at text, what you usually will find is that shorter texts often have one claim. Okay. So if I'm looking at an editorial cartoon, that's only going to have one claim. A commercial will have at most two claims. Okay. So if I go to politics and I look at some of the commercials out there that, and Trump doesn't have many commercials that I've seen for Hillary, so otherwise I'd give you both. But Hillary's argument about why you should vote for her and not Trump, the claim she makes in some of her commercials is that Trump is not good for our future. Okay. Why? Why do I know that? Because she uses a lot of children, and then she uses voiceover from Trump. These are different rhetorical tactics that we can talk about, but the claim that she's trying to make, the thing that she is put forward in order to persuade an audience, is that Trump is not good for our future. Okay, so how do I know that? Because I look at the text and I see that she's trying to build this case. She's not making a larger claim about why Okay, she might have one why per commercial, but not more than that, because you don't want to overcomplicate it. Okay, a claim with shorter text, you usually only have one. With longer texts, you can have many. Okay, a book length argument, like a book you might find in the library, will have a claim for every chapter, if not 6 claims for every chapter. So what you want to look at when you're trying to figure out what your stakeholder is claiming is seeing what are they trying to persuade me or persuade the audience about. What are they trying to do to persuade the audience? Okay, there might be multiple claims nested in one larger claim. Okay, so what's useful is to try to break that apart, because the larger claim can be, you can look at that as the thesis. What is your stakeholder's thesis about this debate? All right. And then the smaller claims are what they're trying to do to kind of build up that thesis. Okay. So for instance, if I'm looking at the people talking about drinking under the age of 21, I might say that some of the claims, well, the overall claim of a pro stakeholder, so let's say we're talking about 18 to 20-year-old college students, right? These are people that think that they should be able to drink, they want to be able to drink, they're on that pro side of the argument. Their claims can be multiple, but overall they're claiming that, if they're pro, people under the age of 21 should be able to drink. People over the age of 18, under the age of 21 should be able to drink. That's a larger claim. Now, how do they prove that? Well, they might say, for this reason and this reason and this reason. Okay, those can all be claims as well. All right. Your book kind of shows those as evidence, but I would say that it's kind of a tricky area, because you're also putting forward this idea that you want someone to believe. So there's a tricky evidence, because evidence is usually taken to be true. So what you want to look at is these claims can add up and make a larger argument, which would be your thesis. Okay. One thing I'll say before I move on, claims can be implicit or explicit, and your goal in analyzing the stakeholder is to kind of understand what are the implicit claims and what are the explicit claims. And there can be both. Okay, so for instance, if I'm looking at someone selling an e-text, for instance, one claim they will explicitly make is that this e-text is more interactive for students, so it leads to more learning. Okay, that's 2 claims, by the way. One, the e-text is more interactive. Okay, that's, you might have to argue that, so that's a claim. 2, leads to more learning. Interactivity leads to more learning. Okay, so those are 2 explicit claims. They will say that more than likely. I don't know for sure, but they will probably say that as a stakeholder. Then the implicit claim is, so you should buy our textbook. All right, that's implied, it's not stated. And so you want to look at this and try to figure out what's implicit and what's explicit, so you can get a better sense of what the stakeholder text is doing and what the stakeholder is doing. All right, are they just trying to sell stuff, or are they trying to change stuff? Okay, that's usually an implicit thing. That's not an explicit thing most of the time. So keep an eye on that. All right. The other thing I want to say about this is, going back to the rhetorical situation, is that these claims are, I've talked about these arrows as a way to understand the relationship between the different parts of the rhetorical triangle. Well, the claims are often explicitly about this. Okay, why? Because if I'm claiming something about the topic, I'm trying to convince the audience to understand. So this is the rhetoric. The claim is the reason that we're making the argument. The claim is the argument. So if we look at the rhetorical triangle and we say, oh, what is this about? It's about, how do I make an effective argument? I need to I need to pay attention to the rhetor's relationship with the audience. I need to pay attention to the audience's relationship to the subject and the rhetor's relationship to the subject, all 3 of these. Well, then I also need to make claims that reflect this relationship. Okay. So you want to look at the claims and say, okay, what are they doing? How are they using this to convince the audience? Okay. So how are they using this to convince the audience? How are they using this to change the topic or change the way we look at the topic? Remember, claims are there to get us to do something about the issue or change our beliefs about the issue. So this topic, okay, so how is it doing that? How is the rhetor making claims that'll strengthen his relationship with the audience, okay? So for instance, you might have implicit claims. If you think about, well, those aren't very common anymore. I was going to say infomercials. If you think about the home shopping networks, they're trying to sell like gadgets and stuff like that. Often what they do when they're trying to sell those gadgets is they make claims that they want the audience to believe or they want the audience to act on that bridge a gap between the rhetor and the audience. So for instance, we all have this problem of food sticking to our pans. So this is why we need to buy nonstick pans or whatever it is, okay? And then other stakeholders will do it in other debates all the time. And knowing that that's a claim that's being made to bridge that gap is useful. It's also useful, and I meant to say this before, let me go back real quick. If I'm looking at a stasis, it's useful when you're writing an essay to, at the beginning, make sure everybody's on the same page by putting in, that's what the hook is about, if you've heard that term, a hook. A hook brings the audience in. Well, a hook also brings the audience in because it establishes the stasis, or this is what the argument is about. And that's what the introduction to any essay is usually about, is trying to set the this is what we're going to talk about. This is what the stasis is. This is why you're reading this, okay? The claims, when you're writing, you want to be very clear. You don't have to say this is claim number 1, claim number 2. That doesn't usually work. Don't do that. But you do want to say very explicitly that this is something that should happen. So you want to be explicit about what action you need them to take, or what they should believe, okay? And there are different ways to do this, and your book talks about some of them. But when you're writing, when you're analyzing, you want to look for these claims and understand why those claims are there. What do those claims help you do? When you're writing, you want to also have a sense of what your claims will help you do. And this is why it's useful to have an outline when you're writing a text, writing an essay, is so that you can outline what your claims are that will help you make your thesis. Okay? So if you are making a rhetorical analysis argument, so you're trying to show that this stakeholder is doing this because of this, so that would be a thesis statement. How do I prove that? Well, this claim, this claim, this claim, this claim, and this evidence, this evidence, this evidence. So that's why it's useful to have an outline so that you can kind of clearly see where your claims are. All right? And then you can do the same thing when you're looking at a text and make an outline of what they've done by doing a reverse outline, and that's just listing what does each paragraph talk about as you go along, and what's their claim in this part of the paper, or what's their claim in this part of the video, or whatever. Okay? So when you're looking at claims, here's some claims for this based off of looking at this tweet and knowing the company. So I know my stakeholder because I've looked at other texts that they have done, and this is just my way of saying, okay, this text explicitly is claiming this. So women are not well represented in the theater as actors or characters. That's an implicit claim. Okay, why do I know that? Because this tweet is very clearly, we have the word feminist, so that's going to already put it as a gender line, okay? And urging men to actively participate. This is a quick thing, okay? Usually, like I said, short texts don't have many claims, but this is kind of doing a lot. You're more likely to see this in something that people will dwell on, more claims. So maybe they think people are going to like really delve into their tweets. But anyways, women are not well represented in theater as actors or characters. Why do we know that? Because you need a feminist theater. Okay, men need to get more involved in feminist theater. Why? Well, actively participate. Men need to actively participate. An audience should not be passive when watching a play. That's another claim. Right? It's an implied claim. This is the explicit claim, And these are in the first and third are the implied claims. Okay, so one thing to think about is, do you agree that audiences to a play should be actively involved, or should they be more passive, like you might with a movie where you go, like especially a popcorn movie where you just go and watch? Okay, I'm not really trying to understand. I'm not trying to change the way I think when I'm watching, the latest Avengers movie. I'm going to just go and watch and eat my popcorn and enjoy it. Okay. Um, so one thing to think about is, do these claims contribute to an overall thesis perspective for this stakeholder? Okay. Well, if I look at this and I'm trying to figure that out, well, I'd probably say, yeah, that thesis claim is they need to get more involved, okay, because because feminist theater is important, okay, something along those lines. I mean, it's not a very good, concise thesis statement, but first drafts. Why? Because we know this, women are not well represented, and then this is just more of an implied claim. I don't need to go into detail about that. So you can have implied claims. Don't worry about that in your own writing. But in your stakeholder text, try to figure out, what are they implying? What's implicit? Okay. And this is just real quick. This is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the way claims can be stacked up to add to the thesis. You want to think about it in terms of an outline. This is more reverse, the thesis at the bottom. But, you get a sense. This claim adds to this claim, adds to this claim, which makes an overall argument about the debate or whatever. Okay. Now, your claim's not going to be anything without some evidence. Okay. So every claim needs to be backed up by evidence. That's why you do research. That's why you analyze, so you can have details and specifics from the stakeholder text. Okay. So that it can help you support your claim. This is what the text is doing. Here's where you can see it. Okay, so evidence is necessary. Without this, a claim would be no more than a statement or opinion. So if I say, I like the Avengers film, that's one thing. That's just a statement. Okay, if I say, you should see the Avengers film, then I need to give you a reason why. And sometimes that reason is implied. Okay, so if I'm talking to my best friend and I say, you should see this movie, then the reason, the because, is implied. It's not explicitly stated. Why? Why should he go see this movie? Because I think it's good, and I think you would like it. That's implied. My friend knows this without us even thinking about that. But if I'm making a case about something more important, or something to someone that doesn't know me well, then I'm going to be more explicit about why they should do something. All right. Evidence is anything that answers the phrase, this claim is true because. Okay. You can draw on logos, which would be the logical side of thing, and being very clear about evidence and numbers and that sort of thing. Or it could be pathos. It could be about emotion. Okay. You should see this film. It's a heart-wrenching story. Okay. Or you should see this play because it'll really make you happy, or whatever. Okay. Or it could be ethos. Like I said, if I'm talking to my friend, that's an ethos appeal. Why? Because we're best friends, and I know you would like it. That's about character. That's about the character of the rhetor. That's about ethos. Okay. It can also be quantitative, meaning about numbers, or qualitative. Usually, if it's quantitative, it's going to be more logos driven. But you can use evidence from a number of different types of evidence. Okay. Evidence makes a claim strong or weak. A strong claim is one that has plenty of persuasive evidence to support the assertion. So if I can back up what I'm saying with evidence, then that makes it a strong claim. If I can't, it's a weak claim. Okay, or if the evidence that I have is not credible. So if the evidence that I have is, oh, you should see this movie because my mom likes it, that's not credible when I'm talking to my best friend. Why? Maybe he doesn't know my mom, so he has no frame of reference. Or maybe, and this is probably true of everybody, your mother's taste in films is not anywhere close to your friend's taste in films. So that's something, it makes it less credible. Okay. Credibility has to do with a lot of different things, and I'm going to talk about that real quick. But, at its core, credibility as far as evidence has to do with whether or not the audience can find it to be something they can trust as far as evidence is. All right. So one thing to just to go back to this, your evidence is mainly about tying your claims to your audience. Okay, so showing your audience why these claims are true. Okay, I guess I should reverse that arrow, but either way, you get the point. So how do you find evidence, or how do you evaluate the evidence that you find? If you want to help finding evidence, please let me know. I'm happy to help. Check the library, check the internet, but be careful, and talk to people. You're trying to find evidence to help you understand this stakeholder, all right? And find evidence of what the stakeholder has done. So you guys know how to do that from your Word 110 class and stuff like that. So I'm not going to go into detail. I've already gone on way too long so far. But once you have evidence, these are some things to keep in mind, all right? You want to know how, and I'll start right here. You want to know how subjective the source is. All right, is it straight opinion, or is it trying to be objective, meaning is it trying to give you facts and figures? One way to look at that is it more academic, or is it more opinion? All right, that's one way to think about the difference between these two. But if something's subjective, it does not mean it's bad. It just means you need to be aware of it. So if someone's opinion is being used as evidence, just be upfront about it. This is so-and-so's opinion. They are trustworthy because blah, blah, blah. Or this is so-and-so's opinion. They are a stakeholder. All right. So that's why I'm looking at it more. That's fine too. Okay. Subjectivity is not an evil thing in academic writing for your paper, but it is something that you want to be upfront about, because if you try to hide that something is very subjective, or if you don't even know that it's very subjective, then that makes your argument very problematic. It makes it very weak because you don't have credible evidence. Okay, if you're upfront about something's subjectivity, then that makes it more credible. Okay, if you hide it, then that makes it less credible. I'm sure that makes sense. But when you're doing this, you want to kind of be upfront about that and use it or address it as need be. So if it's subjective, but you still want to use it, but you think it's problematic, talk about why it's problematic. That's fine. Okay. The other part of this is this idea of the crap evaluation. And I put a worksheet that allows you to do this for each of your sources if you choose. I'm not going to demand it. So you can look at what exactly this means. But this is something that the librarians at William T. Young put together, and I've been using for a couple of years to help students out. The crap evaluation is just a way to kind of judge whether or not a source is crap. So you have currency. Is it current? It doesn't need to be current. If I'm doing a historical thing, currency doesn't matter as much. But if I'm looking at a debate right now and I want to cite something from 30 years ago, that's a little bit questionable. Does that really help you if I'm looking at a debate from right now? Okay. If it does, that's fine. So for instance, if you're talking about police discrimination and you want to talk about the history of police discrimination, then that you're going to bring up stuff from 30, 40, 50, 100 years ago. That's fine, but you want to know why you're bringing it up. So the idea of these questions is to see, okay, is it current? Why does that matter? Okay. So is it relevant? Or if it's not relevant, then don't bring it in. But if it's questionable relevance, why bring it in? Why are you going to do that? So this, if it's subjective, why bring it in? Is that relevant? Okay, someone's opinion. All right. Is it authoritative? So does the person have authority? Can they speak about this issue? Okay. So for instance, I might trust, I might trust a chef if he's talking about a recipe, but I'm not going to trust a chef if he's talking about his treatment by police or his feelings towards vaccines, unless he's got all this other stuff to go along with it. So if he's a minority chef, then maybe his treatment by police is important to bring up, especially if he's a celebrity. Or if I'm talking about vaccines and this guy is someone that is well aware of sanitation procedures and you want to bring that in, then that's fine. But you want to make sure that you recognize and tell your reader what the authority they have. Is it accurate? Obviously, that's important. And then the purpose. Why did they write this? Why did they put this together? Okay. This is useful to evaluate your sources, but it's also very useful to evaluate your stakeholder as well. So don't be wary of bringing this in. Why did they do something? What relevance does it have to the debate at hand or to the argument that they want to have, the stasis? Is it current, or are they using old information? And if so, why? Okay. Do they have authority to speak on this issue, or are they talking about something that they don't know anything about? All right. These are very useful things. The other thing I want to say about your evidence is make sure your evidence is diverse. That just helps you make a stronger case as if you are bringing in stuff from the academic world and from the real world, or if you're bringing stuff from your stakeholder and other stakeholders to help you understand your stakeholder, okay? Or if you're bringing in stuff from blogs and from academic sources, that this diversity helps you make a very strong case for yourself, which helps your ethos appeal and helps you make your claims. And you also want to make sure you're thorough, so don't be afraid to go back and do more research if you need to. This is also honestly why it's a good idea not to wait to the last minute to write anything. And believe me, I have that problem more than anybody else in this class in the past, waiting too long to do something. So if you wait, then you're going to be less thorough. So try to make sure that you are going back and looking to fill holes if you need to. All right. This is just a way to look at the crap system. This is the first couple lines of the worksheet, and you should be able to use it. I recommend it, and I recommend saving it if you are, so you can have the MLA cited and that sort of thing. The claim, if you have a claim and you provide evidence but it doesn't work, okay, it isn't convincing, then one thing that you might want to think about is what the warrant is underneath that claim and evidence. And warrant, one way to look at it is that a warrant, and I'm going to move through this really quickly because I know I've gone on for a while. A warrant is an underlying belief, opinion, idea, or feeling that allows for your evidence to logically support your claim. It's the underlying assumptions. A warrant is a way to look at a warrant is it's what's the underlying assumption underneath any claim. Okay. So for instance, claiming that we need to solve global warming by doing this, 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 and this, the underlying assumption is global warming is a problem. Okay. If you don't think global warming is real, or you don't think global warming is a problem, then you don't care about what they have to say. The evidence doesn't help. The claim doesn't make sense. Is it useful? It's just an opinion. It's just a statement. Okay. But if you make a claim that has an underlying warrant that is strong and shared between the rhetor and the audience, then you have an effective claim, especially if you have evidence, a lot of evidence. So, for instance, one thing that's bothering Hillary Clinton right now is that Trump has made an effective claim about her trustworthiness. Okay? Why? Because he has evidence with her emails, and the underlying warrant is if you're lying about this, you're lying about other things. Okay? So if you're lying about the emails, you're lying about other things. That's the assumption. If you're lying, then you're going to lie. Okay? It's a problematic for Hillary because she doesn't know how to fight it. She keeps bringing up things that say, trust me, I'll be more open in the future or whatever. And it wasn't until just recently that she started saying, I'm sorry. Why? Because the evidence, trust me, doesn't matter if the underlying assumption is you're a liar. If this assumption is that Hillary Clinton is a liar, then the evidence, the ethos evidence of trust me, I won't do this in the future, I won't do this again, I've learned my lesson, whatever, doesn't work because the warrant says that she's a liar. So the evidence, there's a disconnect. I hope that makes sense. But there's a ton of other options for this. And I won't go into it because I've been going on for too long. But if you've ever been asked to check your unstated assumptions, that's what this is. Okay. If a warrant is not shared, then a claim cannot be supported by the evidence, and then it just is an opinion. Okay. Even if you do not pay explicit attention, it is always useful to gauge the warrants of your audience when writing for yourself. Okay. And then if you want to, and this is higher level rhetorical analysis, what are the unstated assumptions underlying the claims and the evidence of your stakeholder? Okay, so for instance, if you are dealing with, let's go back to the underage drinking. If you're dealing with the underlying assumption that alcohol means more fun, okay, which is an underlying assumption, especially in like beer campaigns or ad campaigns and that sort of thing, that alcohol leads to more fun, that's an underlying warrant and something that you might want to talk about, okay, especially if your stakeholder is making the claim that people 18 to 20 are responsible and will treat alcohol responsibly. If alcohol is just about having fun and cutting loose, then that kind of evidence is not going to connect, and that might be why this debate is not a larger thing than it is, because people just don't connect, don't make that connection between the claims and the evidence because of the warrant, right? Another example for another group, the digital text, there's often an assumption that because we read on our phones more often, it's more portable, all right? That's an assumption that a lot of people challenge when you're dealing with reading, because just because I can read something on my phone doesn't mean it's useful. So that assumption of portability is important. That's a warrant. That's a opinion, an idea, but it is one that a lot of people don't share, which is why e-texts are not bigger than they are already. Okay. So just like before, I wanted to give you a sense of this in the rhetorical situation. So your warrant is this unstated thing that connects all this stuff. So it's the unstated ideas that your audience has towards the topic. It's also the unstated ideas that your audience has towards the rhetor. Okay, so again, if we're talking about hot button issues, like let's say, go back to abortion, if there's two sides arguing in an abortion debate, then this unstated assumption is often very negative. And that's the same case with a lot of these bigger issues that I'm glad nobody is talking about. But this, it's something that there's a lot of hate that's unstated and underlying a lot of these claims. Okay, so abortionists are baby killers. That's a hateful thing, and the warrant underneath it is that abortion is murder. Okay, it's not unstated a lot of times, but you get the idea. And then it's also about the rhetor's understanding of the topic and what's unstated about that. If the warrant, often you run into problems not here, but here. Okay, where the audience has a different warrant or a different understanding of the topic than the rhetor does. And that's where you often run into problems. Oop, went all the way to the end. We're getting to the end, so you can see. So here, just to look at the warrants underlying this stuff, women should be represented as more complex characters in media. That's something I personally agree with, but it is an assumption underlying this. When you say that women are not well represented, if that's your claim, then the assumption is they should be well represented. Okay, men need to get more involved in feminist theater. Okay, well, if we look, they're not involved enough. That's an assumption. Now you can jump and say and flip it, but the key to really understanding warrants is to kind of get at the stuff that isn't just the flip side of a claim. So, for instance, men are well represented in theater. That's an assumption here. Okay, that's the idea that men are not stereotyped, and men do play complex characters, and men often take the leading role. Those are unstated assumptions. Those are unstated ideas. It's not something that the stakeholder is going to try to defend with evidence, but it is something that other people might be interested in. Okay, I'm not going to say that men aren't well represented. That would be stupid, but I might say that men are stereotyped in their depiction in a lot of genres, just like women are. That's a way to challenge it, to challenge the warrant, okay? But it doesn't necessarily mean that I don't agree with this stuff, all right? So overall, this is a very complicated look at rhetorical analysis, but you want to look at you want to try to analyze as you're going along and looking at your stakeholder text, what is their position and why, and how do they make it? Okay, so what is their position? How do they make it? That's kind of the thesis idea that you want to look at for your rhetorical analysis essay. When you do that, you want to pay attention to the context. Okay, where is this argument taking place? How is it taking place? What history is there behind it? Okay, who's the audience? Who is the rhetor talking to? Who is your stakeholder talking to? And they're not talking to you most of the time. They're not talking to you. They might be, but most of the time they're going to talk to somebody else. So who is their target audience? Okay, what exactly is being talked about? The stasis idea. Okay, what is being claimed? What's the exigence? Why is this an issue? What's the evidence? And then we didn't talk much about it, but what are the constraints? Okay, what kind of genre and media constraints change the way that this is being argued? Okay. So, and I've already gone on for a long time, so I'm not going to go into detail about this, but I would recommend that you read this part of your book and let me know if you have any questions. But one thing to be careful of when you're making your own argument, and something to pay attention to in your stakeholders' text, is whether or not they have faulty logic. That's mainly because if there's a pathos appeal or an ethos appeal, you can usually find fault with it pretty easily and not have trouble showing why it's problematic. But when it comes to logical arguments, you want to be able to show evidence for why it's a problem instead of just saying, no, I don't believe it. Okay. So for instance, you have fallacies of relevance, or bringing in relevant information or relevant evidence. Okay. You have fallacies of presumption, or where you are presuming that someone agrees with you or presuming that something is happening. And then you have fallacies of grammar, which seems like it doesn't matter. But if you're making a rhetorical appeal and you change the way that you talk about something, which is grammar, these are the rules that allow us to talk about things, then it can make a big difference. When you're looking at this, you want to really pay attention to ad hominem attacks, especially in heated debates. Okay, so if you have someone that is talking about police discrimination from the victim side of things, all right, and you see that they are attacking police by saying that police are racist without any evidence, that's just an attack. That's an ad hominem attack. That's an attack on a person instead of on the idea. All right. So, and a lot of times this happens. Okay. Victims are blamed in sexual assault cases because, ad hominem, what was she wearing, that sort of thing. That's switching the topic and focusing on something different. So ad hominem is attacking the person, not the idea. If your stakeholder is doing that, point it out. Why? Because that's a tactic. It's a tactic that can be very effective because people buy into that stuff all the time. It's also a logical fallacy that weakens their case if it's scrutinized. But if your stakeholder is just kind of flailing and doing all this stuff because they're doing a protest, then they're not counting on long-term evaluation. They're counting on emotion. And this is something that gets emotion going. So talking about why they're doing this is useful in stakeholder analysis or in rhetorical analysis. Red herring, this is where you introduce an idea that kind of leads us off topic, takes us away from the point. So it's similar to ad hominem, just ad hominem is an attack of the person, of the other rhetor, not an attack, and not just off base. You often hear red herring in like mystery stories as someone that you think might be the murderer but isn't. And then you have straw man, which is one that we often see. Straw man is where you create this like very easily knocked down version of your opponent's argument as a way to knock it down and then make it seem like you know what you're talking about. So for instance, if I'm looking at vaccines, a lot of doctors will characterize the anti-vaccine people as being so careful. I'm trying to figure this out. They attack them as being scared mothers, okay, And so even if they're not mothers, but scared parents of autistic children. And that's often what they do. They say, oh, they're just scared. They don't know exactly what's going on. So don't pay attention to them. Okay. Doctors are saying this, and I honestly believe that vaccines are important, but they are, in doing that, ignoring a lot of the concern about the number of vaccines that people are taking and some valid concerns that the anti-vaxxers will bring up. So this is a straw man argument because they simplify their case and make it seem like it's stupid, okay, or seem like it's trivial. It's not stupid that they're scared parents, but it is something that's trivial when we're talking about science. It's not something that we need to deal with if we're talking about medical science. All right. So that's kind of what straw man is. Begging the question, it just means you are trying to get someone to you're trying to lead the conversation. Okay. And then equivocation is just kind of muddying things by not exactly stating a specific point. And if your stakeholder is doing that, please point that out. Why are they avoiding making an explicit claim? Okay. And then you also have inductive fallacies. So deductive is where you take a whole bunch of evidence and, or I'm not going to get into that. Never mind. If you need a refresher on inductive versus deductive, just Wikipedia it or go to your book. But inductive fallacies are where you have fallacies of weak induction where you are drawing conclusions from the evidence that don't really make much sense, okay? Or you have fallacies of false analogy where you are drawing a comparison, but it doesn't make sense. So here you have appeal to ignorance where we don't know, so therefore it must be true, okay? So we don't know whether or not, to go back to vaccines, whether or not vaccines cause autism, so it must be true. That's not going to work. That doesn't make sense. Post hoc ergo propter hoc, it happened, therefore it happened because of this. Okay, that doesn't make sense either if we talk about moving the drinking age, and people are trying to say that the drinking age is at 21 because it'd be worse if it weren't. Well, we don't know if that's the case. That's something that doesn't make sense. Okay, and then slippery slope. If we do this one thing, then it'll lead to disaster. Most people know slippery slope arguments, but if someone's using a slippery slope argument, then why? Why are they making this fallacy? Why are they doing this? So look into this. The logical fallacies can be very useful for trying to understand what your stakeholder is doing if they make a fallacy. If not, look at what they are doing that's actually logically sound and why is it effective. Okay. So that I don't keep going on, I'm going to go ahead and call this the class. I'm happy to explain this in more detail if you want. We will keep using this as we go along. I'll try to simplify it a little bit. But understanding the rhetorical situation is important to both looking at your stakeholders and seeing what they're doing, and in the next project, knowing where you are as a rhetor, as your team rhetor, and where you want to go, what claims you want to make, who your audience is going to be, what's the argument actually going to be about, what are the underlying assumptions, what are we going to be constrained by with a website, okay, that sort of thing. So I hope this has helped. Again, I apologize for the length. Have a good day, and let me know if you have any questions about anything that I said here or anything in your book. Take care.